A very warm welcome, everybody. Bienvenue à tous. Bienvenue at Living with Rising Waters. Je m'appelle Saskia van Stein. Je suis directrice de Bureau Europe, un modeste et petit centre d'architecture et d'art à Maastricht, à Pays-Bas, tout près de Liège. Mais je suis là pour être votre modératrice. Comme vous entendez, mon français n'est pas parfait. So this will actually be a conference held in English. For those of you who need translation, please feel free to take one of the headsets on the side. We're in for a little bit of a roller coaster, starting already 15 minutes late. I thank you for joining at this conference. A kick-off conference of the second edition of the LUMA Days. Thank you very much, Maya Hoffman, founding mother of the LUMA Foundation, for this thoughtful and purposeful gathering. Today, we will talk about the effects of climate change in hospitality, taking nature, ecology, science, economy, and social values through the lens of culture and, as mentioned, climate change into account. We will talk about several aspects of climate change: the extreme water events, rising sea levels, salination on the one hand, and scarcity of fresh water on the other. During the next 2 hours, we'll have 4 keynote speakers addressing topics on how to deal climate change and its consequences for the designed environment and nature in the broader sense of the word. We'll try to analyze these complexities and how to address which topics on what scale. So what can we do as humans? And I like actually thinking about it, as I'm from the Netherlands, being here in Arles, how much we have in common as it comes to understanding this intrinsic relationship we have with water, and particularly in this region of the Camargue. Now, when it comes to design attitude and its shift, I dare say, in the broader sense of the word, that whereas the 20th century was a century of fighting against the water, building canals and dikes in order to prevent the floodings. Now, the current shift we could understand in the 20th century is to look for more adaptive ways to deal with the water. Strategies that involve, let's say, a natural undertone. This conference will try to address our collective intelligence, a creative potential, and anticipate and adapt what climate change is doing to bring global challenges and design solutions, again, for this region in particular. We will hear inspiring examples from different continents, from different contexts, from different worlds and different disciplines. And I was actually looking at, the title's already gone, but the title reminded me that we might actually have to look for a new language on how we deal with the challenges ahead. And in the French translation, à la recherche d'un voie commune, so it's the language, it is the spirit nearly. And in the English, it's the common ground, which obviously is much more about the earth. And I'm hoping that we can, let's say, touch upon these both. I will introduce the keynote speakers to you in a minute. After that, we'll have 4 guests that will respond to the guest speakers, and then I will run it around for your questions. And we hope to finish off with a drink and a performance later on. Now, without further ado, I would like to ask Henriette Waal to the stage. Henriette Waal will join me to elaborate a little bit on the masterclass that has led up to the marvelous exhibition on your right-hand side. You can visit it later, and some of you have already. And she is the artistic research director together with Jan Boelen, and has led the masterclass that has led to this program, together with sonographer Elisabeth Guillon. Please give a warm applause to Henriette Waal. We do it with one mic, yeah, maybe. Before we start, about the masterclass, maybe you could, let's say, closely touch upon what exactly is Atelier LUMA?
So Atelier LUMA, for the ones that don't know, is a design research lab of the LUMA Foundation. We aim to produce design and social design content here and within the territory. We're based in a building over there, where we tomorrow have a banquet with our community, with the people we work with, the designers and other collaborators. So we're rather busy with process and production than with the display, but it's very interesting to relate to that amazing display here. So for instance, the Prouvé that is here with us still today, a part of the exhibition that is left, it was one of the basics or the starting points for the masterclass Living with Rising Water. So we questioned what does this heritage mean today? What are the needs here in the Delta? What materials to work with, the people? So that's a little bit on the atelier. Another starting point for the masterclass was that the topic of climate change was brought up by Jean Gilbert, the director of Tour de Voilà, who will also join us in the panel discussion later. I have some images.
Yeah. Maybe one back?
Does this work?
It does.
Yeah. So for instance, this is an image that was made by one of our Atelier LUMA members, Andrea Anner, and it actually shows the sea level in 118, so in 100 years. And actually, it's quite shocking what you see. So this was one of the impacts that climate change could potentially have on this delta. And another one is, of course, in a delta is all about sea and river interacting with each other. And this is shows the different floods. But if you can have a closer look in the exhibition where all these posters are on display. Maybe very briefly on the masterclass. So it was an architectural masterclass where different schools, the architecture schools worked together, but also an art school was involved from Istanbul, from Montpellier, from Marseille, from Cameroon, and from Vienna. Here you see that we also used the School of Prouvé behind us as part of the workshop. And it's actually Serge Pinotto, who's also here with us. Where are you, Serge? There you are. Who's the former engineer of Jean Prouvé. And it was really special to have with him this moment to exchange not only in between cultures, but also in between generations. The second day of the masterclass, we spent in the Camargue. We looked at specific sites. Here we were in Salins-de-Giraud. And here you see different students interacting with Berend Strijland and Koen-Lea Deyemi, who were the leading tutors of the masterclass. So in the end, 8 case studies were developed, which you can also see in the exhibition. It's actually, the whole exhibition is a booklet in which you can read about each of the projects. Some are more architecture-oriented. There's also a film which is about animals that are also important to take into account in times of climate change. But I'm not going to talk much longer. I just wanted to give you a brief insight.
But just maybe one lesson you learned, either about the heritage of Privé or, let's say, bringing together different schools of thought from different geographic localities. Is there something that, when you think back of this masterclass held in March here, that you think, okay, they brought this to the surface?
I think one of the things was the exchange between architecture and art students. That was very fruitful, and also I think Kunle, because he was active in both professions, that was very fruitful. Yeah.
So it's different kinds of creative insights, bringing new perspectives.
Yes, but also like the different cultures. Like, I mean, I don't want to stigmatize, but the people from MEF University in Istanbul, they were more, maybe a bit more technical and pragmatic oriented, where the Viennese took a more like philosophical approach. And like that is also what in every project in Atelier LUMA we try to do, is to bring these different disciplines together, because we really think that they're the creativity, like,
yeah, it's a nourishing ground.
Yes.
Thank you for this brief introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, Henriette Waal. Okay, without further ado, the first keynote speaker, Mr. Professor Dr. Han Meijer, a fellow Dutchman, professor of urban design at the Technical University of Delft. He's a writer, researcher, and educator, and has devoted much of his professional life on the fundamentals of urbanism and on the delta urbanism. So we're getting into the larger scale, if I may dare so. He has a special attention for the investigation into the new balance we are searching for in relation to urbanization processes on the one hand, and climate change and its vulnerable relationship to the delta territories. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Dr. Han Meijer.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and Henriette, also thank you for inviting me at this very interesting conference, because it created also the opportunity for me to get familiar with the Rhône Delta and with Arles, because I have to confess, it is a shame a little bit, but I knew very little about the Rhône Delta. So while preparing my story, I was wondering, would it be relevant at all for the people here in Arles and in the Camargue, the Rhône Delta, what I have to tell? I was so lucky that I had a chance to look around here 2 days in Arles and the Camargue. The weather was not so good, but the final conclusion is, yes, I think it is relevant what I want to tell, but perhaps even more interesting is that the Rhône Delta might be relevant, and how it looks like and what is possible here might be relevant for quite a number of other deltas, and I'll try to explain that. And what I explain now is mainly based on a general idea we developed already for many years at the TU Delft with a group of urbanists, architects, landscape architects, civil engineers, environmental scientists, about how to work together and to develop something which is really necessary, which is developing a new story on the deltas. How should we deal? And convinced from the idea that design can play a very important role in that. This is the Dutch delta, and which looks perhaps quite familiar to the Rhône Delta. And as a matter of fact, that's not something new. Both deltas are at the end of rivers in the European continent. And if we look to this very simple drawing, we can have both the same territory as a source, the Alps, and their river basements are much longer, are much broader than the rivers itself. And that is important to be aware that these rivers are collectors of a lot of rainwater and sources of enormous river basins where every drop which falls from the air is collected, discharged to the river, and finally discharged to the delta. And this creates a condition which not only has to deals with water, but deals especially also with the fact that deltas are land-making machines, you can say. We are got used to think about water as an enemy and as something which is very dangerous because it results into flooding. But we tend to forget that these rivers also carry sediment, and these sediment are the basic, the founding elements of each delta. Deltas are basically very young alluvial territories, a product of as well rivers and sea, where the silting up of sediments created new land, and that is the story of the Dutch delta, which you see here. And there are still spots. However, most of the coast of the Dutch delta is eroding at the moment, but there are still spots where you can see this land-making process, where the coast is extending, and some years later you're able to use also that piece of land. That's also the point in the Mississippi delta, which is, as a matter of fact, one big wetland, a product of the Mississippi and the Missouri, which carry the clay and the sand and the mud from the Rocky Mountains through the American continent and finally deposited in what we call today the Mississippi Delta. Everything which is dark blue in that drawing is new, relatively new land created in the Holocene after the last ice period 10,000 years ago. And for instance, the Parana Delta in Argentina, you can literally see the land-making process. This is a delta which is still growing with 100 meters a year in the direction of Buenos Aires. Here you see the very young land which just raised up a couple of years ago, and here you can see what happens just in a period of 50 to 100 years. Then the land is already 1 meter high and people are able to inhabit it, and prepared also for flooding, because the water is still a very dynamic element, and every time when it's flooded, it's depositing again a layer of sediment, so then after flooding the land is again a little bit higher. I guess this is also for a big part the story of the Rhone Delta. And when I traveled around yesterday, you can see the same type of images in the Rhone Delta of still very young pieces of land which have been created not so very long ago, and more solid, consolidated parts of land which already was created perhaps 400 or 500 or 1,000 years ago, and now is a piece of agricultural land. So when you compare a number of deltas, like we did here in this study, and all the blue, the dark blue colored area is new, relatively new land. And all these deltas, they are, however, I have to say, they were growing because of the formative power, you can say, of rivers and sea. And this alluvial land, it has several advantages which created the condition that people like to live there. First, it is very fruitful, fertile. It is very fertile, so it's fantastic land for agriculture. And the waters are very fertile, full of fish and shellfish. So for fishing, it's fantastic. They are on very strategic locations between the continents and the oceans, so ports and trade, what was developed in all these deltas. And that is the reason what you see on this image, that indeed it was also said during the discussion here half an hour ago, that in the urbanization process which is going on, that especially deltas are taking part, the most part of this urbanization process. The largest metropolis of the world, you can find them in delta areas. There are something like 30 metropolis, more than 20 million inhabitants, and most of them, they find themselves in delta areas, which has to do with all these advantages which I mentioned already. And you can, well, mention fantastic figures of the success of this type of process of the urbanization in deltas, which brought us a lot of welfare and economic benefits. But there is a but. First, how did we make these deltas inhabitable, and not only inhabitable, but how did we use the water systems of the rivers and the deltas for our own benefits? And especially when you look to the 19th and 20th century, you can see that we developed an approach to treat river systems and deltas as industrial machines. And we got convinced that it's possible to manipulate, to control this system completely, and to consider them in the same way as also the industrial machines are considered. And that's how especially the Dutch Delta became an example worldwide, but also the Mississippi River system was developed in the 19th and 20th century in a very comparable way. With dams, locks, narrowing the rivers to deepen the navigation routes, to create better conditions for shipping, to create as much as possible land for agriculture, so more and more narrowing these river channels. And I looked a little bit around in the history of the Rhone, and you can see a similar story also what happened in the 19th and 20th century, especially in engineering works in the Rhone, to improve navigation conditions, but also to use it for energy supply, etc. And you can say that looked like a very strong, heroic story, that we really were able to conquer nature and to dominate nature and to create our industrial society, including this conquering the nature itself. And it brought us a lot of welfare, a lot of comfort. We are completely used to think in this type of conditions, and not only all these factories and industrial products, but also our cities, as a matter of fact, fitted in the same idea of creating this modern industrial world. And what we we're not aware of so much, that there is a very big but, because one of the results is what happened is especially what I try to emphasize as the most important power of rivers and seas, that is this formative power. That formative power decreased enormously. This is a picture which in red shows the land loss in the Mississippi Delta, which already is occurring and still in the future will go on when nothing changes, as a result of the fact that the Mississippi River is channeled completely, is not able anymore to deposit its sediments in the delta, and the fresh water in the delta and the wetland conditions completely disappear. And that means again that the wetlands as a buffer against hurricanes, to protect New Orleans against hurricanes, is disappearing. And well, the consequences we found some years ago during Hurricane Katrina. Also the Dutch lowlands, they are lowlands because they were relatively low, but we made them very low by draining the land. The land is subsiding and is now, for a big part, under sea level, while sea level is rising. So the right top image shows what we call the relative sea level. Not only the sea level is rising, but our land is subsiding, and the result is what we call the relative sea level rise. And this story is happening in almost every delta all over the world. It's a rather tragic story that we ruined the conditions, the natural conditions of land formation in the delta, and we changed it in a land erosion condition. And that creates the real danger, the real vulnerability. It's not just climate change, it's our own contribution as mankind to these deltas that the situation is now so serious and dramatic. And this is just another overview of the ranking system of the vulnerability of deltas worldwide, suffering from this relative sea level rise. Everywhere the ground, the land is sinking, subsiding, and the sea level is rising. So there are a lot of reasons why this is happening, and it all has to, most of the reasons has to do with human interventions, and the results, well, we know them all. What is only the last 10, 15 years, which have been in news, some very serious disasters and flooding, and again an overview about the vulnerability of large cities all over the world. And the Rhone Delta is also indicated not yet as the most vulnerable area in this ranking system, so that is perhaps something to become not too pessimistic about the Rhone Delta. So deltas are next to the most profitable and the most positive areas. They are also the most vulnerable regions of the world. And the big question is how to create a new type of approach. We need that new type of approach. And we need a new strong story, which is not only about climate change and water, but this story needs to be connected with other parts of societal life, with how, in the same time, we have to change our economy. We have to think about a different type of economy. We have also to think about how community building can be improved in a lot of cities. And thinking about, and this is not only what we invented in Delft or somewhere, but I think this is becoming a rather general story, which you can recognize in many delta areas, that we become aware that instead of defining how we want to urbanize the delta and then thinking about the consequences and creating these conditions for erosion in the deltas, that we should turn on completely it on to the other side, that we should start with thinking about how this bottom layer of the landscape, and that means the delta landscape, where the water-land relation is organized, what type of space does it need to be able to deal with extreme events? And looking to the future, these events will become more extreme. So, and we can say something about it. And we can define it, we can make drawings of it, and we can try to define the consequences for where it is possible to urbanize or where we should take special interventions to create a new relation between urbanization and the landscape. So especially paying attention to this landscape system as a main guiding element is important in our approach. And the interesting thing is that especially this structure of a strong, durable landscape can be very interesting, not only for water management and flood risk reduction, but also for environmental, economic, and social purposes. It can really become a new, interesting, and important tool. And what you see now popping up in several cities is what is the existence of a new kind of language about green-blue networks or green-blue systems. This is a map of the city of Rotterdam, which indicates also what is really necessary to be prepared for extreme rainstorm events in the future. What kind of areas do we need to store water permanently and sometimes to store water temporarily? And if we include these elements in one park system, it can contribute not only to water storage and water management, but also to the benefit of the city in multiple purposes. And I will show some examples of where it already has been applied, of where the application is going on. And perhaps we should not talk about a new story. If we look to some examples, we can see that this story already is going on, and we should embrace it and enforce it. One of my favorite examples is the city of Boston, which you can see here in a 19th century picture of in the late 18th century. You can see Boston is a peninsula in the middle of an estuary of the rivers, and in the 19th century, Boston extended very rapidly. In the same time, the economy developed, and especially it was just after the Civil War. So, in a societal sense, also something should have been done to create a new sense of community in this city. And what happened was that the city invited Frederick Law Olmsted, a famous landscape architect, and he created a park system where, as a matter of fact, he glued the different urban fragments of Boston together, but in the same time he created a system which was able to drain the whole city, to create a runoff system for the water to the bay, and also to extend the storage capacity in events of very heavy rainstorms. So this was already one of the, it was not called like that, but a very smart green-blue network, which also is embraced by the citizens of Boston, and until today, this green park system is considered as one of the most important elements of, let's say, the Boston civic culture. Currently, you can see in London the same type of approach, where the London estuary, the Thames estuary, has been redesigned and is in redevelopment to get loss of the enormous amount of industrial sites and a fragmented character, but also to create more space for water, and to restore also the process of sedimentation and of natural growth of the land. And very similar is a program which has been carried out from 2005 to 2015, so it's recently applied, you can say, which is called Room for the River, and Room in the Netherlands. The Room for the River program, as a matter of fact, created a complete new approach. Instead of heightening the dikes and narrowing again the rivers, it created, as the name suggests, more room for the rivers to be able to extend and also to create new conditions for landmaking and for ecological processes. This created, of course, the most difficult problems, especially where the cities are. So, as, for instance, the city of Nijmegen, which you see bottom right, there a big intervention has been made, which was originally not so very enthusiastic, embraced by the city itself, because they wanted to extend the city at the other river embankment. But finally, the city also celebrates this type of approach very much, because it means finally that a new aisle in the middle of the city created a kind of new common park where citizens from both sides of the embankments can take profit, and in the same time it creates more safety for the city against flooding. And in the same program, for instance, another example is this agricultural area, the Noordwaard, very close to Rotterdam, where farmers were supposed to move completely. The national government wanted to pay them a big amount of money, but they preferred to stay, and they developed themselves by negotiating with landscape architects and engineers to build new artificial mouths for their farmhouses. So during flooding, they have to escape to their own houses, and most of the year they just can use the meadowlands for their cattle. And finally, Rotterdam itself also is developing a plan to redevelop. Hey, what is happening? I need a technician, I think. What happens?
Ik weet het niet, zij moet het even doen, denk ik. Is het dit, denk ik? Ja? Heb je deze? Wat is het? Ja?
Okay.
Je hebt nog 5 minuutjes.
Technical problem solved. The city of Rotterdam, which is developing now also a plan, the river as a tidal park, where the tidal energy and the sediment deposits should also work as an element of design and redesign the embankments of the river, and where the river, instead of an industrial, hard, key landscape, can be transformed in a more green landscape which can function as a park where people can enjoy. In the same time, it can improve the ecological quality, and it will improve safety and the landmaking process of making use of the sediments of the river itself can be used. And finally, these type of urban landscapes can be the final result, as imagined here by students from the Rotterdam Academy. And at the coast, also this principle of working again with nature instead of trying to fight against nature is now in all kinds of interesting experiments going on. This is here on the left is one of the most interesting, the so-called sand engine, which is an enormous amount of sand that is done by mankind. So the dredging machines drop an enormous amount of sand in front of the coast south of The Hague, but it's the currents and the wind, they carry the sand along the coastline, which strengthens the coastline and improves in the same time also the ecological quality of the coast. And how to combine that with new ideas for urban development and for landscape making is the interesting thing, which we try to study together with the coastal communities along the Dutch coast. And finally, you can say something like this, also imagined by one of our students, can be the result, a new green-blue system, creating conditions for a durable approach to the delta system, which can deal with extreme water events and in the same time creates a condition for a new type of public space system, is finally going on. I just had 5 minutes. I just have 2 minutes to close with, well, it's again the same story about New Orleans, where we work together with people after Katrina, where it was calculated also how much water storage really do you need in the city to be prepared for these enormous rainstorm events and hurricanes. And if you take that as a leading principle for new urban layout systems, as well as from the scale of the parcel until the scale of the whole region, then you get something where New Orleans can also be proud of and can present as something where the debate with the local community can result in commitment and in a big support by the public itself. So finally, we should turn on our way of thinking and to be able to work again with this formative, essential formative power of the deltas, and design in all these examples which I showed. I think it's important to be aware that design played a very important role, but not alone, but as a discipline which on the one hand, please let me finish this. On the one hand, collaborating with scientific specialists and engineers, calculating what we need and what is possible. On the other hand, dealing with the communities, with public authorities, with developers. And finally, we have to make several loops. And finally, we find a design which is also applicable in the delta itself. And to close, I think when I studied the maps and also traveled around in the Camargue, in the Rhône Delta, this is still one of the most, you can say, unspoiled deltas of the world. And of course, also here, canalization and diking has taken place, but compared with, for instance, the Dutch delta or many other deltas in the world, there is still an enormous possibility to work in the way and to create other conditions for a relationship between delta formation and urban processes than what at the moment directly is possible in these other deltas. So perhaps, and that perhaps fits also in the whole idea of LUMA and to be a design laboratory, perhaps the Rhône Delta can really show the world what are possibilities instead of only look to other deltas, what might be possible. And perhaps Arles can become the deltaic city of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Han Meijer. Han, 1 second. Han, you touched upon quite a lot. I stuck with one question on storytelling and instruments, because you talk about several scales, the social, the communal, the political, I dare say, the skill of addressing these topics. Maybe ask for a planetary scale. My question to you would basically be if you've seen insightful examples of how these scales can come up with a big story. You started off with saying the modernist era, the 20th century, had the story of the machine, the collective building. what could be our storyline? You did hint upon it, but did you see examples of, again, where the narration, where the social and the economical and the ecological is bound in together?
You mean here in the Rhone Delta itself?
More in a generic way, actually, like the essence
well,
of...
In the generic way, I hoped that I made clear that, for instance, examples like what I showed in Boston, but also the Room for the River examples, where a new type of public life and conditions for public life by creating a new type of public space, which was created by the new type of floodplains, that played a role in as well, the flood safety as regarding the city of Nijmegen, for instance, or the Noordwaard, as a new type of community which feels itself responsible also for that type of intervention. And finally, I think what is, for instance, in Rotterdam now going on, where also ideas are how this approach can be linked to build up a new type of experiments with economic life. And that was why I found the LUMA laboratory here so interesting. That links very much with that type of experiments. So how can also the products of a delta territory, varying from shells to reed or what else, be elements of a new type of economy which can be placed in the delta itself.
Yeah. Now, the reason that I was in fact asking is, let's say, what are the ingredients of the narration and the dissemination of this story? Because you touched upon the situation in Nijmegen where change is not always welcomed. So it's change both on a political level, change maybe of how the designer has its attitude, and also how the community has to learn to embrace the water again.
Yeah, I think it's not possible to define an exact roadmap how to develop a story that is very much depending from each side and territory and social community. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your insight so far.
Ingredients indeed.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, one more time, Han Meijer. From the meta scale and the global scale, we move into a particular context and the scale of architecture with our second keynote speaker, Venise Beyrak from Istanbul, together with Oral Oktas. She runs the office, founded the office, I must say, in 2009 called So, Architecture and Ideas for Istanbul. They have won numerous awards, and their articles and projects have been disseminated in verse kinds of media, including the Huffington Post wallpaper and Die Zine. They won the Young Architects Commission of the PS1 in the MoMA, but she's here as she is also an educator connected to MEF in Istanbul, and she was part with her students of the masterclass that was mentioned by Henriette earlier. Without further ado, I invite you to welcome Sevens, dankjewel. She will speak on Istanbul and how they've tried to analyze the situation there and come up with a flood-resistant housing. Please give it up. I can't see you yet, but I hope you're close. Yes, you are. The floor is yours.
Hello. Sorry. I'm Sevince. Well, this is my second time in art, and I'm quite surprised how water plays a major role in the urban discussions here. And I'll be talking about water as well, but not as a risk, but rather as a chance for hope. So this image is from an internationally renowned artist video, Halil Altunder's video, which is about the relation between human land and water in Mesopotamia, where water was the source of the life. We have also a risk of flood in Istanbul, where our studio is based, where we are based. But the major disaster is actually earthquakes that I'm going to talk about tonight. And this presentation is about a possible post-earthquake scenario. But before going on further with our proposal, I just want to give a shorter explanation about Istanbul and the earthquake. So this is the North Anatolian fault, which is the main creator of the earthquakes on this zone. And the reason it is there is the Asian plate, which is the Arabian Peninsula, it wants to go west, and the Eurasian plate, let's say Russia, pushes it back. It's more like a political explanation now, but it's why the earthquakes keep happening in that zone. And in Istanbul, there is an anticipated earthquake in over the magnitude of 7, let's say, in 20 years. The research shows, and it's going to be 2.5 billion economic loss and 2 million homeless people. That is anticipated. So until now, this is a very dark picture of the anticipated earthquake, which is also the way it is envisioned in mass media, both in TVs and internet. So it is like a big catastrophe. I mean, yes, it is, but it is always envisioned as the end of the world, which means the end of the city, but it is not. I mean, even in the worst case scenario, like 14 million people will survive. So we have to be producing survival scenarios instead of focusing the dystopic envisioning, which makes people feeling despair and like desperate and gloomy about the situation and do nothing about it. So we started with the question, what can we do about it? So because we're architects, what can architecture do about earthquakes? And the response, one of the responses is that designing a temporary shelter, because like a better shelter, an emergency house, because the research shows from the previous earthquakes that people have to live even up to 2 years in the tents, in the temporary housing, and in very, let's say, bad conditions with no heating, no cooling, no infrastructure. So we started with that. And then, of course, so there is a huge literature of emergency housing design in the world. But then can these designs be an answer for Istanbul? This was the second question, because it's quite a specific city. Here you see, this is the map of Istanbul. And here in this part, this is Marmara Sea, and which is an inland sea where the earthquake will happen. And this is Bosphorus, the narrower part. And the anticipated earthquake will be on Marmara Sea. And you see, this map shows the effect of the earthquake. It diminishes through the north because it's going to be on the sea. So the parts that will be affected by earthquake will be near the sea, let's say. And then this is the map which shows the number of households with emergency sheltering needs. So here you see in the darker red areas, which are also the central part of the city, highly dense areas, they show the most building damage. And I think this is the striking one, most striking one. So this shows the gathering points that has been announced after the earthquake in 1999. So we had a huge earthquake. The final biggest earthquake we had was in 1999 and 2001 in Marmara Sea. And then right after that earthquake, so the governments and local authorities, they started to have bigger steps. So they announced all these areas as gathering areas where people can escape from earthquake, and also they could put the tent areas, temporary tent areas. But in the last 20 years, as you see here, the population doubles, and while the population doubles, the number which was like around 500, the gathering sites, they were all privatized. They were all public spaces, and most of them, like 70% of them are privatized now. So the ones we can only have 60,000 shelters on the remaining 77 gathering areas. So this is one of the privatized pubs. So this is, I think, also a global issue, which also is also very effective on Istanbul. And this is showing one of the privatized public areas. You see, it's in a very central area. It was a huge site for gathering. And then it is now a mixed-use private area, let's say. So, well, it's every culture has its own way of dealing with disasters. Some embrace it. Let's say in the case of Japan, they have these huge fires and they name it flowers of Edo, and they learn to live with it. And some ignore it and some forget about it. I think in our culture it's more like about forgetting, because after the last earthquake we had in 1999, all the local authorities and governments, they had big steps, but now that is all forgotten because since 20 years nothing is happening. So this map shows, again after that earthquake, we have this emergency transport, emergency roads that are left for disasters, let's say, situations. And now in the darker gray, now it's 80% of them turned into parking lots, and this is done also by municipality. And this is an overlapped map. Here in the darker areas, you see there is a risk of isolation due to the post-earthquake building ruins, because they're mostly on the historical historically planned areas, like narrow streets, exactly. So there is a problem of gathering area. So before the question of doing a better shelter, the question is where to put that shelter, because we currently we lack that. So we need gathering areas, and can we do them on the north? Actually we can. We cannot, sorry, because in the north we have all these forest areas, and they're going to be debris storage areas after the earthquake, and also the newly constructed. If there is a huge earthquake happening here, all the new sites are going to be constructed in the north of the city, and also people want to stay closer to their places. When in the case of an earthquake, they don't, even in the temporary sheltering, they don't want to go. So the question is where to put that. And here is a photo which shows the city, the relationship of water and the city in Istanbul. You see on the right, that is right on top, that is Marmara Sea, an inland sea. And here on the left is Bosphorus, and this is an inlet, Golden Horn, but we call it Golden Horn, and it is mostly a still water because it's more like let's say a delta. So we proposed, our proposal is to have emergency housing on water, on that still life area. That was the beginning point, and how we are related to this conference about water. So when we raise a proposal about being on an earthquake proposal, so the first question is tsunami. So, well, Marmara Sea, that is one of the most investigated inland seas throughout last 20 years, because all this research about tsunami and earthquake has been going on there. And this diagram shows that the part that Golden Horn and Küçükçekmece Lake, there are two safe still water areas where emergency housing can be on. And if we continue with the advantages of settling on water, so as we said, we have empty space. And the second one is logistics, which is also, the research shows that after the earthquake, because most of the roads will be blocked or they need to be repaired, so maritime transportation, which means that all the help, the aids and the goods could be transported by sea, so it's important to be accessible by sea. And the second thing is, the third thing is infrastructure, because Istanbul has an inclined topography. So even you need to make a temporary site, you need to have a infrastructure work in advance to have some flat areas, but on water you don't really need that. And the final one is ownership, that the water is public, so that all those privatized public areas, it could be replaced by that in this case. So where on water should be settled? As I explained, in case of tsunami, there are two possible safe areas. One of them is this lake, and the other is this inlet, Golden Horn. But it's also interesting that they're also in the middle of the areas where most emergency housing is needed, because this is the overlap of those two maps. which shows the road blockage and the building damage. So we see the darker areas are around those water areas. So all this research has been done in 2003, right after the final biggest earthquakes I mentioned, and they're now renewing it. So these two areas could be potential sites. So our proposal was on Golden Horn, focusing on Golden Horn, where 30,000, almost approximately 30,000 living units could be built. So here is a very initial sketch of this idea and how this emergency settlement could be on it. And also this is how the settlement could be envisioned, and again, an initial idea. So when we first raised this idea, it took quite, it drew quite a lot of interest, and it was published in National Geographic. And then we started working on this prototype. So at the beginning, it was more like a conventional emergency house, let's say. But while we worked more on it, it transformed into to be like a more lighter structure, because in the case of like this is this Sicilia, we are still working on it, but this is the final version right now. The reason is because if you need to propose an emergency housing in the case of Istanbul, it needs to be easily transportable and mobile and easy to be stored. If in the case that you're producing it in advance, it needs to be easy to be stored and cheap and accessible, affordable. So here is a model which shows the prototype. And the most important aspect of this version of the prototype that it doesn't need any, let's say, it doesn't need a qualified manwork, and it needs to, because in the case of a disaster, I have 3 minutes left. Okay. In the case of a disaster, it's difficult to find it. Well, okay, until now, I talked about the architectural part of it, but of course, when you propose an emergency floating post-disaster housing, it's not only an architectural issue, so it needs to be a transdisciplinary work. So we are collaborating with sociology and coastal engineering departments of Boğaziçi University, where we are making a joint course with students, architecture students, sociology students, and coastal engineering students to work on this subject. And they are also, so in the first 6 weeks of the studio, they make a research about these 6 topics about site, and then the sociologists, they investigated the site in terms of who will stay in this house, who will need more housing, emergency housing. And then they also investigated the existing buildings, and they looked on the world emergency scenarios, and they worked on infrastructure, how to get clean water in this case of the scenario, how to have the wastewater and reuse it. And this one shows how to get energy in such an emergency floating settlement. And this one shows how about anchoring types on the sea, the research. And then they also made a research about the ongoing literature, existing literature. And this one shows the logistics, how it's going to be produced, how it's going to be transported to Golden Horn. And this is the list of the ships and tankers that could enter Bosphorus and Golden Horn in the case of an emergency. And they now started to produce alternatives of floating settlements. That's all, I think. So we are now working on it, like it said, it has a 2-leg project, let's say. One of them we are working on the office, and the other is we are working with the university, and it's going to be, I think, hopefully displayed in the Istanbul Design Biennale, both the prototypes and all this research students have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Sevinç. Thank you, Savins. I have two questions. Basically, you finished off with this notion of, let's say, the transdisciplinary, or what we can learn from different disciplines. In your approach, you bring together several students. What is the benefit of that? Why did you choose, before I make assumptions on that?
Why did we choose sociology and coastal engineering,
No, or this
to work like this?
transdisciplinary approach?
Well, I think it's kind of an obligation in this case of a work, because it's really not something that you can only work on the architectural, because it's not about designing a perfect prototype that looks nice and that can float and that's efficient. That's the part we could do, but it's also the part of a bigger scenario about the city, about also about being on water, and this really needs to be much more, like, not to be superficial, but not to go into deeper. It needs to be a transdisciplinary work. That's what we were thinking.
Yeah, and what are the challenges you face in working in these transdisciplinary teams?
Well, of course, it's not easy. On paper, it looks great, but mostly the students, because each profession, students from each profession, they see each other like an obstacle to move forward, or like the sociologists, they think everyone is trying to go very fast, while the engineers and architects, they think the sociologists get them slower. But it's in the end, it's quite fruitful, and for us also, it's very. It's quite an inspiring atmosphere to be in that, even with the challenges.
Yeah. Shifting a bit from the educational questions to, let's say, the real world. In the beginning of your presentation, you were getting into the problematics of the privatization of public realm and public space, and something that actually also Han touched upon, this private-public dichotomy. And what I was trying to understand, obviously this is a scenario, this is not so much dreaming out loud, but if we take it into a vision of the 21st century, how could you envision this private-public relationship in terms of responsibility taking for this kind of projects?
Well, in fact, when we first had this idea, because right now we have a municipality and government who loves construction. I mean, they generally love it, but they also love to construct on water. So the first time we proposed this, we were quite afraid that it's going to be like a new agenda to be more on the water. But this is only that what we were underlining it all the time. This is only for the case of emergency, that you can use water as such an area to get to expand. But in the I mean, not in the case of disaster, it really needs to be, I think, discussed how you deal with water, because we feel it that the coastline of Golden Horn and the coastline of Bosphorus keeps changing each year, because we are feeling it and turning it into a more profitable areas.
So I was thinking about, I think it was 2 years ago that IKEA won the Habitat Award with their temporal shelter. What I'm trying to get at is, let's say, on the one hand, security / providing these temporal shelters as a ideology / social responsibility versus a privatized opportunity. Am I dreaming out loud? Sorry?
From the market. Yeah. Oh, well, it's also another question, that we need to be reconsidering again. Well, if this happens to be a very profitable project, but then I think in any case, it's going to have a contractor, even the municipality. I mean, even the contractor is public, so we are living in such a time when the contractor is public. It has a different way of being public, not like we used to talk it in the 50s. So our municipality has its own 50 different companies that works on construction and the city. So it's quite a complex question. I don't know I could answer now, but I get the point. It needs to be considered. Yeah.
Maybe we can address it in the panel also, because of the restricted time. I want to thank you, Savins, and sorry for not pronouncing your name correctly the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, Savins Bayrak. Okay, so now the headphones can go off because the next presentation is in French. I have to look at my note here because the CV of Ms. Ghislaine Verheijst-Leblanc is rather impressive. She's director of DREAL, Government Interregional Manager of Flood Risk in the Mediterranean. With her 20 years of experience and a PhD, she has focused on major hazard prevention over, as I mentioned, 2 decades, so we're honored to have her here. She's also the vice president of the French Association of Earthquake Engineering. It is a running theme, funnily enough, and currently working for the Ministry of Ecology, which she has done since 2001. She is working as a project chief for flood prevention in the Mediterranean, and her mission has strong links with civil safety and authorities. Her talk, again, as I mentioned, will be in French. I invite you to the stage, Ghislaine Verheijst-Leblanc. There you are. Sorry, I couldn't find you. Please give it up.
Bonsoir à tous. Merci de m'accueillir ici. Merci encore à Henriette et à Elisabeth pour la chance donnée de pouvoir participer au LUMA Days. J'aurais beaucoup appris à vos côtés. J'espère que les suites seront riches ensemble. La présentation que je vais vous faire est un petit peu différente de ce qu'on vient de voir. On a parlé bien sûr des acteurs, du delta, de ce territoire particulier, des possibilités qu'on peut avoir également pour faire face à une crise sismique en Turquie. Moi, je vais vous parler d'une nouvelle approche dans les acteurs du territoire. Il y a bien sûr la population, au premier chef, les collectivités et l'État. L'État souvent critiqué, l'État un peu souverain, contraignant. Et je vais vous parler du nouvel esprit dans lequel on cherche à travailler et de la nouvelle approche qui dépasse l'échelle du delta du Rhône et qui vise à travailler sur de plus larges territoires. On a commencé à parler d'inondation, mais quand on parle d'inondation, on parle de quel phénomène? Il y a différentes typologies de phénomènes autour de l'inondation et l'inondation est multiple. On a bien sûr l'inondation la plus connue et la plus maîtrisée par l'homme. Saskia, tout à l'heure en introduction, parlait de digues, de barrages. Il est clair qu'autour des rivières où les villes se sont construites, on a une inondation classique de crues, de débordements de cours d'eau qu'on a voulu maîtriser au fil du temps. Et on a beaucoup cherché à travailler sur l'orientation de ces cours d'eau, l'endiguement, le lit de ces cours d'eau et moins sur la partie territoire. On verra qu'on est à un tournant aujourd'hui. On a également la partie torrentielle. Quand on parle des inondations autour du Rhône, on est sur des cinématiques relativement lentes, même si ça peut paraître rapide sur certains territoires. Ici, on a plusieurs heures pour réagir et plusieurs heures, ça peut sauver des vies, ça peut permettre aux populations de se mettre à l'abri. Mais sur une partie du territoire, quand on regarde le sud de la France, on a également des phénomènes extrêmement rapides qui, en quelques minutes, transforment des rues, des rivières, des vallons qui étaient secs à l'origine en véritables torrents qui rasent tout, emportent tout sur leur passage. Bien sûr, les habitations, les voitures, mais également les hommes. On a également, et ça c'est une part moins maîtrisée par l'homme, une nouvelle inondation, une inondation qui prend une part de plus en plus importante, c'est le ruissellement. On a urbanisé à tour de bras sur certains territoires, on a imperméabilisé les sols et il est temps maintenant d'en payer le prix. On a parlé de changement climatique, théorie un peu abstraite au départ qui devient de plus en plus réelle et dont on perçoit les effets. Les phénomènes sont de plus en plus imprévisibles, de plus en plus fréquents, de plus en plus violents et couplés à une imperméabilisation très forte, on a de véritables inondations de villes où le ruissellement prend une part encore plus importante et vient aggraver des inondations classiques. Bien sûr, les parties agricoles ont vécu de longue date ces inondations et tout à l'heure, le premier intervenant parlait de nécessité d'avoir des zones inondables. Oui, c'est nécessaire. On a besoin également de pouvoir libérer cette eau, qu'elle puisse s'étendre sur des zones d'expansion de crues et des inondations choisies parfois le sont sur notamment des zones agricoles. C'est une des stratégies notamment sur le territoire du Rhône. Et puis on a moins parlé, pourtant on en a parlé au travers du changement climatique et du fait que la mer vient gagner de plus en plus sur ces territoires et réduire nos côtes ou les transformer, de la submersion marine. on a sur le delta du Rhône et sur la partie Camargue un réel impact de tempêtes, de coups de mer, de submersion marine relativement classiques. Mais là, on vient de parler de risque sismique avec C20C, et c'est vrai qu'il faut le savoir, et c'est parfois oublié, la Camargue est également exposée au risque de tsunami. Alors on est sur un pays, la France, à sismicité modérée, bien plus faible que la Turquie. Pour autant, des séismes sur les côtes africaines et sur le Maghreb, des séismes extrêmement majeurs et puissants, peuvent induire un phénomène de tsunami sur nos côtes. Sur les côtes rocheuses de notre région, l'impact serait mineur. Par contre, sur la Camargue, extrêmement plate, les vagues, même si leur hauteur est peu significative, seraient fortes et rentreraient très largement dans les terres. Et puis, dernier risque d'inondation, on a également sur notre territoire, dans le sud de la France, des systèmes géologiques karstiques qui sont difficiles à mobiliser, qui vont accumuler de l'eau au fil des pluies et des événements, et puis la relarguer de façon assez imprévisible et parfois violente. Et on a des remontées de nappes ici ou là qui peuvent créer des inondations insidieuses. Donc vous voyez que quand on parle d'inondation, sur le territoire de l'arc méditerranéen sur lequel on va s'exprimer, ces différents phénomènes et différentes formes et différentes stratégies de gestion, pour autant, le territoire est unique, il faut y arriver à combiner ces différents phénomènes et bien d'autres choses, on en parlera juste après. Sur la stratégie de prévention française, elle vise 3 objectifs. Bien sûr, protéger les personnes, ça reste l'objectif numéro 1. Réduire les dommages, parce qu'on vit de plus en plus d'événements coûteux, et ça coûte très cher à la société, et peut-être qu'au fur et à mesure, on aura plus de mal à s'en relever. Et justement, sur ce dernier point, le 3e objectif est de faciliter le retour à la normale, d'assumer finalement qu'on va vivre des inondations de plus en plus fortes, mais qu'il faudra être en capacité de se relever, s'adapter à ce phénomène-là. C'est sur ces 3 points que la France essaie de travailler. Alors bien sûr, l'administration, mais également l'ensemble des territoires. On a beaucoup travaillé sur le premier point, protection des populations, pendant très longtemps, en essayant de travailler sur les cours d'eau. Aujourd'hui, on essaie de plus travailler sur des territoires plus résistants, moins vulnérables et mieux préparés à faire face, des territoires qui ont acquis des réflexes. Je vois que certaines diapositives ont disparu ou ont été bougées. Sur l'arc méditerranéen, quand je vous parle de l'arc méditerranéen français, c'est sur cette grande part sud-est. En fait, on est sur 23 départements en tout et 4 régions. La Corse, territoire insulaire, avec des conditions extrêmement particulières, une identité très forte. La région Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur, dans lequel on trouve le delta du Rhône. L'Occitanie, un petit peu plus vers les Pyrénées. Et puis la Drôme et l'Ardèche, qui font partie d'une autre région, Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, mais qui vivent le même type de phénomène, c'est-à-dire des pluies très intenses méditerranéennes liées à notre climat et des phénomènes extrêmement rapides, des inondations extrêmement rapides et non pas des inondations très lentes comme on a pu voir sur la Seine, par exemple, il y a quelques mois. Quand on regarde le niveau de risque au-delà des phénomènes dont je vous ai parlé, on sait qu'à peu près un tiers de la population vit aujourd'hui exposée au risque d'inondation dans des conditions plus ou moins favorables, et notamment à l'inondation courante, que je vous ai dit, débordement de cours d'eau, crues classiques des cours d'eau. Sur la submersion marine, on est bien sûr sur la frange littorale, et même si on a des territoires qui sont très attractifs au niveau du tourisme et du foncier, seuls 3% de la population sont exposés à ce type de phénomène. Quand on regarde cette carte et qu'on regarde le nombre de catastrophes naturelles, donc la France a un système depuis les années 1980 qui est l'état de déclaration de catastrophes naturelles qui permet d'être indemnisé, mais qui nous permet en signaux de savoir combien d'impacts majeurs on a pu avoir sur ce territoire. On voit ici avec les différentes échelles que bien des territoires ont été touchés depuis les années 80 par 20, 30 inondations majeures. Et quand je vous parle d'adaptabilité, de préparation des populations, on peut avoir un essoufflement, un impact économique et social très fort sur ces territoires qui sont très fréquemment impactés avec des phénomènes de fatigue, de déprime, de dévalorisation de certains territoires sur lesquels il faut se préparer au-delà des coûts directs qui sont plus facilement perceptibles et sur lesquels on peut trouver plus de moyens de gérer. Au final, quand on regarde les 23 départements dont je vous ai parlé, quasiment la 100% des communes ont été impactées par au moins un phénomène depuis les années 80. Donc autant dire que le risque inondation, aux côtés d'autres risques auxquels l'arc méditerranéen est soumis, les feux de forêt, le risque sismique, les avalanches pour les territoires de montagne, mais le risque inondation reste le risque prioritaire en termes de niveau d'exposition et d'impact fréquent et massif. On a des outils de prévention. Alors c'est vrai que je vous parlais de 3 objectifs au niveau français. Malheureusement, parfois, on a été vraiment plutôt en réaction après des catastrophes. On a conçu la réglementation au fil des catastrophes, ici ou là, en France ou à l'étranger. C'est valable pour l'inondation, c'est valable sur le risque sismique. Et on était moins en anticipation, virage qu'on a essayé de prendre. Il y avait un outil qui était vraiment l'outil phare du gouvernement et des ministères, c'était ce plan de prévention des risques, inondation. Arles en a un, bien sûr, qui permet de maîtriser l'urbanisation dans les zones exposées. Maîtriser l'urbanisation, ça veut dire interdire de construire sur des zones fortement exposées, en aléas très importants, ou permettre de construire, mais sous certaines conditions, des hauteurs de plancher, par exemple. Cet outil est un outil performant qui a marché. Pour autant, on sait que, vu le niveau d'exposition de nos territoires, il va falloir accepter de construire en zone à risque, mais construire intelligemment, différemment, pour être moins vulnérable, plus préparé, mais vivre avec. Sur le vivre avec, on a eu, au-delà de cet outil très réglementaire et contraignant en matière de droit du sol, des démarches qui sont aujourd'hui incitées sur les territoires, qui visent à travailler non pas à l'échelle d'une commune, de la parcelle ou d'une commune, mais de travailler en intercommunalité et de regarder le sujet comme étant un sujet de bassin de risque. Quand on a un cours d'eau, on a un bassin, et ce bassin fonctionne de l'amont vers l'aval, et il peut y avoir des solidarités qui peuvent être mises en place sur certaines communes qui sont moins exposées, mais où le risque prend sa source, par exemple. Et l'intérêt de travailler par bassin, et à cette échelle-là, ça va être de travailler en multi-acteurs. Pas que l'État, mais les collectivités, les populations, des associations, des experts qui se mettent autour de la table pour se saisir du sujet et travailler sur la connaissance, améliorer notre connaissance des phénomènes, sur la maîtrise de l'urbanisation, bien sûr, mais sur la gestion de crise, notre niveau de préparation, sur les systèmes de surveillance qu'on peut avoir, météo ou hydrométriques, pour pouvoir anticiper la montée des eaux rapides, des systèmes d'alerte, et puis, bien sûr, toujours des renforcements de digues, puisqu'on a des digues existantes, mais qui sont parfois vieillissantes et qu'il faut entretenir, parce que le risque de rupture augmente au fil du temps. Sur ces projets partenariaux et cofinancés par l'État, qu'est-ce qu'on peut dire aujourd'hui? Alors oui, ils sont en pleine expansion en France et c'est le cas sur l'arc méditerranéen. Par contre, vous voyez que au niveau du delta, on n'en a pas encore. Alors certes, ce territoire bénéficie d'un plan grand fleuve qu'on appelle le plan Rhône, qui a permis de drainer des financements et de faire quelques actions, mais il serait intéressant que les collectivités et les autres acteurs dont l'État se mettent autour de la table pour concevoir des projets autour de ce territoire, d'autant que le delta du Rhône est qualifié comme territoire à risque important d'inondation au niveau national et donc comme un territoire prioritaire pour gérer ce risque. Les inondations de 2015 ont conduit à avoir un virage et à travailler dans un autre esprit. Pourquoi? Parce que même si on avait vécu des inondations majeures, catastrophiques, Vaison-la-Romaine en est une sur le sud de la France, on s'est un peu réveillé, on a subi un électrochoc, un tremblement de terre humide avec ces inondations. Octobre 2015, c'est 20 morts. 20 morts, pourquoi? Bien sûr, parce qu'on a pu construire en zone inondable et que la correction, je dirais, de ces actions, parfois en territoire très exposé, prendra plusieurs générations, mais surtout parce qu'on avait oublié la force de l'eau et les bons réflexes. Et certaines personnes, sans juger leur comportement, parce qu'on ne saurait pas quel comportement on aurait, nous, face aux inondations, sont allés dans des sous-sols, ont voulu prendre leur voiture et se sont exposés. Et donc 20 personnes sont mortes, 10 personnes sont mortes dans des parkings souterrains. Face à ce constat, on s'est dit, au niveau de l'État déjà, mais on a une réglementation ancienne, on a des outils qu'on pensait miracles et pourtant ça ne passe pas. La culture du risque est en train de partir sur ce territoire. On en discutait sur le territoire camarguais. C'est vrai qu'il y a une identité forte autour de l'eau et pourtant on a perdu la mémoire de ce risque-là, la mémoire de cette eau, de se vivre avec. Et puis, malgré des outils d'information préventive standards, mais qui étaient papier et un peu passifs, on n'arrive pas à faire passer les bons messages et à faire acquérir les bons réflexes. Et ce problème-là, ce n'est pas qu'un problème des Alpes-Maritimes ou de la ville de Nice, le problème est global. Et le préfet a ainsi décidé sur la zone de défense, donc sur tout le quart sud-est, de se dire on va travailler à une autre échelle et en interdépartement, en interrégion, pour se saisir de ce sujet qui est commun et essayer de travailler différemment, parce que ce qu'on a fait n'est pas très performant. C'est arriver à collaborer déjà entre services de l'État, parce qu'il y a un certain cloisonnement, du fait du découpage géographique, donc travailler en interrégion, travailler entre les différents ministères. On a bien sûr le ministère de l'équipement et celui qui gère l'urbanisation, mais il y a également le ministère de l'Intérieur et tout ce qui est préparation des populations, gestion de crise. Il y a également le ministère de l'Agriculture qui devrait travailler ensemble. Et puis, il y a surtout travailler tous ensemble sur le territoire, travailler l'État avec les services de secours, avec les collectivités, avec les citoyens, avec l'éducation nationale pour éduquer nos enfants. Et puis, deuxième point, inscrire l'action dans la durée. On a trop été dans le réactif. Une catastrophe, une loi, un décret, et puis on oublie, on passe à autre chose et on reprend une catastrophe. Là, essayer d'inscrire cette action dans la durée et d'en faire un petit peu le quotidien, et on verra ne pas parler que de risque forcément, même pour traiter le risque inondation. Assurer une cohérence de l'action publique également, de l'État et des collectivités, ce qui ne veut pas dire trouver une solution unique sur les 23 départements, mais aller tous dans le même sens et surtout échanger sur les actions qui ont pu marcher ici et qui pourraient marcher ailleurs, donc mutualiser et s'écouter. S'écouter est peut-être un des points de départ extrêmement importants, avoir des instances de dialogue. On a ainsi créé au niveau de l'arc méditerranéen depuis 2 ans une communauté de travail qui mixe des collectivités, des associations, des experts comme Météo France par exemple, les services de l'État autour de ce sujet-là pour voir qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire d'innovant, de différent, qu'est-ce qui marche pas, quelle est la performance de nos actions ou leur non-performance. Sur la culture du risque, c'est très marquant sur ce que je vous ai dit sur les Alpes-Maritimes. On voit qu'on a loupé quelque chose et qu'il faut travailler vers de nouvelles approches. Des approches qui sont plus au direct avec les citoyens, qui vont plus les toucher. Et les outils réglementaires ont peut-être le mérite d'exister, mais ont montré leurs limites. Il faut travailler sur plus de visuels. Vous avez vu à l'entrée un film avec des témoignages, la population qui parle à la population, des entrepreneurs qui parlent à des entrepreneurs. Le message passe beaucoup mieux et beaucoup plus crédible, beaucoup plus perçu et beaucoup plus fort. Et puis sentir le sujet, c'est quoi être pris dans une inondation? Vous avez des photos de démonstrateurs qui ont été développés dans ce cadre, des démonstrateurs où on se met comme si on était à notre voiture et on fait monter l'eau avec un ordinateur et on voit si on arrive à sortir de la voiture. On voit que très vite, à partir de 10 à 20 cm au-dessus du bas de caisse, il est impossible de sortir de la voiture à part en cassant la fenêtre et en sortant le plus vite possible pour ne pas être emporté et noyé. Sur les parkings souterrains, on a développé un autre démonstrateur où les personnes se trouvent face à une porte de parking et essaient de sortir avec de l'eau qui pousse derrière et très vite on voit qu'on est piégé et qu'il faut anticiper. Donc ça, les gens, comme sur des tables vibrantes sismiques, sentent dans leur corps ce que c'est que être pris dans une inondation. Et c'est comme ça qu'on peut mieux comprendre l'intérêt des bons réflexes. Je ne prends pas ma voiture, je ne vais pas sur une route inondée, je ne descends pas dans un sous-sol. Faire acquérir les bons réflexes. L'État s'exerce, les collectivités s'exercent, mais il faut s'exercer avec la population, il faut s'exercer avec les enfants. Les Japonais, sur le risque sismique, très tôt à l'école, éduquent les enfants à avoir des réflexes. Nous avons beaucoup de théories dans notre système scolaire, éduquer les enfants à savoir se comporter, savoir anticiper une inondation, regarder comment leur maison est sensible ou pas à une inondation, c'est sûrement la voie d'une éducation pertinente et efficace pour avoir des citoyens plus conscients et plus résilients. Et puis, laisser les citoyens s'exprimer. Souvent, la solution vient du terrain et ne vient pas des hautes sphères et des bureaux qui sont souvent déconnectés du terrain. Donc, créer des instances où on crée avec la population des ateliers participatifs, collaboratifs, écouter les témoignages et les conserver, les archiver, les transmettre. Et puis, c'est vrai qu'on a beaucoup essayé de développer des expositions autour du risque d'inondation, mais si on n'est pas sensibilisé, on ne va pas forcément y aller. Se servir de fêtes populaires, le 14 juillet par exemple en France, ou le 15 août, ou une fête autour d'une thématique, peut permettre de parler du risque inondation comme une composante parmi d'autres pour le territoire. Et puis l'éducation des enfants, c'est par les enfants et par cette nouvelle génération qu'on arrivera aussi à sensibiliser les plus anciens. Donc développer des jeux et une implication des enfants. Sur les 8 bons comportements, on a essayé de les symboliser et de les diffuser sur les territoires. On voit aujourd'hui qu'on en mesure les impacts et que ça devient de plus en plus connu, mais le chemin reste encore long. Autre point sur ce nouveau regard, c'est, je vous le disais tout à l'heure, ne pas travailler en auto-centré, s'ouvrir, avoir une approche globale, une approche qui soit suffisamment flexible, adaptable au changement climatique. Henriette en a parlé tout à l'heure, à une échelle qui permette de faire s'exprimer des solidarités, des collaborations. L'entraide intercommunale, c'est pas une légende et on y croit beaucoup, et avec les changements législatifs, on mise beaucoup sur cette collaboration intercommunale. S'appuyer également sur les spécificités et les potentialités des territoires. Bien sûr, chaque territoire a ses défauts, ses inconvénients, ses difficultés, mais il a aussi sa richesse, ses potentiels, et c'est en s'appuyant sur ces potentiels qu'on arrivera à faire s'exprimer une vraie politique de prévention des inondations efficace. Mobiliser à toutes les échelles, du citoyen jusqu'aux gestionnaires de grande industrie et jusqu'au service de l'État, et puis sortir du champ réglementaire et pré-mâché, préformaté, faire preuve d'innovation, tester, expérimenter de nouvelles choses à partir du terrain. Peut-être qu'on va se tromper, mais peut-être qu'on trouvera de nouvelles voies, des voies qui sont plus appropriées par la population et qu'on pourra diffuser. Et puis enfin, et pour finir, c'est bien de faire de la prévention des risques, mais un territoire, il ne vit pas par rapport au risque. Il vit avec l'eau et il vit avec le risque. Alors on essaie de ne plus vivre contre les inondations, mais de vivre avec. Mais c'est surtout en cherchant un projet de territoire. C'est quoi l'avenir de mon territoire? C'est quoi mes objectifs? C'est quoi mes enjeux de développement, mes potentiels, mes forces? Et à partir d'un projet de territoire, on arrivera à y intégrer de la gestion du risque inondation, mais pas en essayant de construire des solutions toutes faites et des projets centrés sur l'inondation qui n'intéresseront pas forcément les politiques, et on n'aura pas cette volonté politique d'agir. Par contre, si on prend un projet social, économique, environnemental et multidisciplinaire, également culturel, on peut là y glisser de la prévention du risque inondation et avoir quelque chose d'efficace et de souhaiter, de porter par la population, c'est ce qui est quand même le principal. Donc pour finir, si vous voulez suivre nos actions et surtout être force de proposition, parce qu'on essaie de construire de nouvelles choses, je vous invite à aller voir notre site et on espère qu'on arrivera tous ensemble à être plus performants sur ces territoires, plus efficaces et plus en cœur avec cette réalité pour vivre avec ces inondations.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ghislaine Verheijst-Leblanc, merci. C'est très impressionnant votre travail. J'ai déjà demandé si je peux poser la question en anglais. Vous répondez en quelle langue vous voulez. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I was struck by, let's say, how you work through different notions of time, different notions of scale, and I think you addressed, let's say, the problems very accurate and what you're trying to do on it on an individual level. But I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit what could be the tools and strategies to create solidarity among the 23 regions that all have, let's say, on the one hand, their own economic reality, and on the other hand, let's say, an electoral mindset. So this is something, let's say, creating solidarity on a bit of a larger scale is something that I'm personally rather worried about. What are your experiences on this?
Alors c'est vrai que quand je parlais de solidarité territoriale, j'étais plus à une approche intercommunale où là, sur un bassin de risque, on peut vraiment mobiliser ces solidarités et trouver des solutions en intercommunalité pour mettre à disposition du matériel, par exemple, pour avoir une expertise qui vient au service de territoire. À l'échelle interrégionale, sur 23 départements, c'est sûr que la solidarité ne va pas s'exprimer de la même façon. Mais on peut ne pas chercher une solution unique, je le disais, parce que ces territoires ont des identités très marquées, des niveaux d'appropriation, des niveaux d'action très différents. Mais on peut au moins partager les expériences et se dire que si un territoire a mis les moyens pour développer un outil qui paraît innovant et intéressant, on peut utiliser cet outil qui est produit vers les Pyrénées et le déployer sur l'ensemble de l'arc méditerranéen. Donc c'est plus dans ce sens, dans le partage d'expériences, dans la mutualisation de moyens, se dire qu'on n'aura pas sur tous les territoires les moyens financiers peut-être pour développer dans tel axe ou tel axe, mais qu'on peut choisir des territoires pilotes. Par exemple, sur l'arc méditerranéen, on se dit qu'on aimerait cette année travailler sur le risque et le tourisme, comment on peut arriver à mieux concilier les deux et à sensibiliser, mobiliser les populations touristiques, travailler également sur l'impact du risque inondation sur des installations industrielles. On ne peut pas traiter du sujet sur les 23 départements, donc on va chercher un département pilote pour traiter d'un sujet. Par exemple, la Corse va nous faire avancer sur risque et tourisme, l'Occitanie sur risque et industrie. Et à partir de ces expériences locales, on essaiera de les démultiplier, d'en tirer des enseignements, des outils génériques pour les autres départements.
So, at least in your context, there's, let's say, a general idea of what the aims could be. Because I was thinking while you were talking about when a river runs through several nation states, in the case of Ethiopia, for instance, now building the dam, which is such a provocation to the countries further down the line. But this, I think, in this context, you will manage. But how do you actually collaborate with private parties? How does that go about? Because the topics that you're addressing, again, I mentioned scale, are huge. So who takes which responsibility? Yes.
Alors sur la sphère privée, il y a quand même deux acteurs qui sont importants. Sur le coût des dommages, quand on regarde le coût des inondations en France, la moitié sont sur les biens courants, notamment les habitations, mais l'autre moitié, c'est les entreprises. Donc on essaie aujourd'hui de travailler avec les chambres consulaires en charge de l'industrie, donc les CCI, pour développer de la sensibilisation des entrepreneurs et essayer d'avoir des opérations pilotes, par exemple, sur cette sphère-là. Le deuxième acteur important, c'est les assurances. Je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, on a un système de reconnaissance de catastrophes naturelles avec une indemnisation des particuliers et des sociétés. On essaie de travailler avec les assureurs sur la performance de nos outils de prévention, savoir si ce qu'on a fait est performant, développer des indicateurs de suivi et puis travailler avec eux à une incitation à réduire sa vulnérabilité parce qu'on a un système assurantiel qui peut être un petit peu injuste en la matière pour l'instant. Donc sur les acteurs privés, pour l'instant, le travail commence fortement avec les assurances et avec la sphère entreprise-industrie.
Yeah. I was thinking, because Vince mentions this idea of the transdisciplinary teams, that you are somehow also moving beyond transdisciplinary or trans-economical realities. So we have to break through the silos also in that domain, I dare say.
L'interdisciplinarité est vraiment essentielle, ouais. Et l'approche économique aussi. Se dire qu'au-delà de l'efficacité, je dirais, de nos actions, il y a aussi la pertinence économique. Est-ce que ça vaut le coup vraiment faire des analyses coût-bénéfice de nos actions? Est-ce que ça vaut le coup pour le territoire et est-ce que l'action qu'on mène pour le risque inondation a un bénéfice social, d'accessibilité, paysager? Donc il faut ouvrir le champ de vision et ce sera long parce que la culture cloisonnée est très ancrée, mais on va y arriver.
Bonne chance. Merci beaucoup. Gisèle Verheijst-Leblanc. Thank you. Very inspirational. Already the fourth keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen. Émilie Gascon. I did see you. Yes, she's an architect and holds a PhD in architecture and planning. She's engaged in 3 poles, research, teaching and practice, as nearly everybody on this stage. Please already go for it, yes. Vous parlerez en anglais ou en français en tout? Anglais, super. Okay, good for me, but and some of the others. That being said, you are an assistant professor at ENSA in Versailles. You're a research officer at LEAV, and your expertise concerns with the theme of water in cities and especially the transformation of urban landscapes with flood. I'm looking forward to your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the last keynote speaker, Émilie Gascon.
Thank you. Do I have to do anything or just... No. Okay, if I do this... next. You just have to go here. This one, okay. Yes. Okay, I hope everybody hear me correctly. It's okay with the mic. First of all, thank you, Henriette and everybody from the LUMA organization. I think it's a great opportunity to be here and be able to exchange on a subject I'm so enthusiastic about. So today I will make a presentation on the transformation of urban landscapes with water. Why would you tune me? Because when we look at floods, we can speak about risk, resilience, exposure, hazard, vulnerability, mitigation, adaptation. I don't know if you're lost in the vocabulary, but what is at stake here? What is the global scope? The global scope is to deal with floods. Some would say to not be negatively impacted by floods, but some others would say that it's not only a question of not being impacted negatively, but also to enjoy, to profit from floods. Some might be thinking it's a naive way of thinking, but I'll try to demonstrate that it's not. Because when we look at all the multiple events, too often and since too long disastrous from social, economic, or environmental perspectives, we can see that we are in a deep need for change. Not only building and new and stuff, but a real transformation, a deep and profound transformation of numerous territories, making them less vulnerable to floods. And how do we make this transformation? Well, this is an open question, but I think this presentation is trying to give some piece of answer, part of the answer. From what I've observed in different projects and in the literature, a path that seems worth exploring is the one of creation of new water-based cities. Well, to talk about water-based cities, I will come back to where it comes from and how it works, and finally to finish by why it is nice to explore these kind of things. First of all, let's try to remember something. Water used to be a natural and visible resource. It was used for fishery, transportation, whatever you wanted. And floods used to be a natural phenomenon, bringing both threats and benefits. But, as a handmaker, I also have a but. But artificialization came through. Not the only thing that came through, but artificialization. We dried vegetated riverbanks. We make new watercourse lines with deviation, channelization, and we even sometimes invert the senses of the streams. All of these actions, and I can quote, of course, more, participated into modification of natural processes, ideological, ecological, all kind of processes that did have a use, a function. And now the disturbance of ecosystems is at great scale. And what we can see is consequences. Consequences are now floods. Floods in New York, floods in Paris. Well, I took a sunny picture just to create a different kind of atmosphere, but it's still a flood. Flood in Venice. The aqua alta in the last century was occurring 7 times per year. Since the 2000s, it's 100 times per year, so you can see the difference of scale. And of course, we can also say that climate change is part of the problem, urban growth also, but I'm not going to enter into all the details. But what you have to remember is that there has been a shift. Water is no longer a visible and natural resource. Now it's more a cultural and invisible resource. Look at the drinking water networks, for example. And floods are no longer an external factor or what we can call a natural phenomenon. It's more a cultural disaster, and it brings more threats than benefits. So finally, it can be said that the negative impacts of floods on societies are finally more the result of an inappropriate settlement more than anything else. And if we look at this problem, we can say that it's a bad luck, it's a problem. But it is also a chance, because if we are responsible, we can act. So let's talk about actions. One of the greatest change occurring when talking about flood is new flood management. New flood management, okay, maybe it's not new, but we should say strong flood management, perhaps. But this kind of new vision is based on the fact that total protection is impossible. Whatever you're doing, you will never be able to control water. So we need to accept water on land, to give it space and to adapt to it. This new vision is really a paradigm shift. You have to understand that, because we used to, but we are still really trying to contain flood, to drain it, to push it as fast and as much as possible as from where it comes from. But now this shift is to say, okay, let's take it and let's keep it on site, which means we're gonna try to retain it, to store it, to slow down it, to absorb, to infiltrate. All the vocabulary is different. So this is something that is starting to be interesting. But what is very interesting to my point of view is that now urban planning and design is also asked to answer to this new flood management. So there is a need, an ask, something that is happening in between two fields that used to be separated. So now that water is taking back space in cities, urban planning and design have to adapt. This adaptation goes, first of all, by what we can call a technical level or architectural level that I will call about security, kind of. This is a case of infrastructure devices that combine the function of water retention with other functions, such as circulation tunnel, for example, in here, or a parking lot in Rotterdam. This is also the case of buildings that have developed flood-proof typologies, such as elevated accesses, entrances, elevated entrances and piles and stills, amphibious housing, floating housing. You all know this kind of typologies, and we just talk about the illotopy that just has the three kinds and makes this island kind of a great experience to my point of view. So you have all these things, but it's interesting to see that these are kind of new. But these kind of techniques are not new at all. There used to be a floating tradition in Seattle since a long time, and in Asia, piles are very widespread. But still, all these kind of answers and the fact to reintroduce this kind of forgotten typology in the middle of the cities are, I think, interesting. And after this kind of first technical and architectural level, you have the second level, the one that I think is the most interesting right now. This is the case of using landscape to help, and not only help, but also to be proactive in flood management. What you can see is that now vegetated areas or landscapes are supposed to be capable and multifunctional or this kind of thing. It's not about greenwashing or whatever. It's not it's not that. It's about to let landscapes be able of producing functions, to have functions. You can have regulative functions, attractive, purificative, productive, whatever, all in one mixed. But what is interesting is now we are thinking again that landscape can provide solutions. First, I would like to show here is an example. It's the idea is to slow down the river upstream. So it's a very specific case, but I really like this project because even if it's not in a city, and I'm trying to speak about cities, it has been started by creating a landscape pattern, and the water, it's not like the designer didn't draw out the meanders and try to make it work. They just create a pattern, and the water decided where it was best for her to go. You also have examples into that category that are water squares. Well, we know them from Copenhagen. We know them from Rotterdam. This is cases of retention on site. And on top of retention or recreation functions, you can also see that sometimes a third function is added. I'm talking a lot about recreative landscapes because this is one of them, like the function with regulations that is the most seen, but don't forget that you can imagine everything. And here, for example, as a third function, you have some biodiversity protection at the end of the park, which is not the park for humans, but it's a third function. Another third function is, so this is when it's dry, and this is when it's flooded. And you can see that the bridge is very important because it's still linking the two riverbanks, so it's nice. Multipunct function is also the case of the river restoration project in Fez, where you also have a pedagogical objective on finally what was a neglected river. This is also the case of this very delicate project that is aimed at bringing together recreation, water retention or storage, but also production. And it's starting to be very interesting to have different kinds of landscapes. And maybe to start to finish this kind of all the landscapes that you will be able to see, all the projects. One is in Berlin, and in order to give the river back for bathing or swimming, they created a river purification area just before. So now you can see that water purification is also, well, it's not aiming as cleaning all the river from all the places, but just it's still a starting point to demonstrate that it is possible to clean water. And of course, Paris also is aiming at this kind of new relationships to water, especially with the Olympics that are coming. They want swimmers to be in the scene, so we'll see if it's happening or not. But what is interesting at the end is to see that it's really a question of using landscapes, but not as an answer of a regulative demand or as a need of flood management. What is interesting in that project is that it's really embracing as a new vision of flood management, and it's really trying to create new relationships between people and water. And it's a way to try to explore new forms and functions to the city. And to my point of view, this is a real issue. This is why I would like to talk a little about what I would call a third phase, a third level, which would be to explore what can one call new water-based cities. The problem is to give a name because some will call them resilient cities, some will call them sponge cities, some will call them blue-green network cities, some lacustrine cities. aquatic cities, you can see all kind of vocabulary. But what all this vocabulary is showing is that people are searching for. It's not something that is already set up and well established. It's non-constituted knowledge, and we just have to explore all these possibilities. It's a field of possibilities and opportunities. But yeah, we have to explore it. And it's not a question of redoing something that were already done. Maybe it's going to be part of the solution, but the question is also to explore new territories in between water and land, to create new identities with districts. This is the Rotterdam Waterstaat project, of course. And what I really liked about this project is like you have all kind of ambiances, atmospheres. But they are also trying to look at different ways, different perceptions of, this is some maps you're not usually used to see. It's a way of trying to recreate totally artificial but new natural processes, thinking way of seeing the geography and topography of a territory. So it's really a question of exploring new hypotheses. Here you have a project from another architectural office, well, actually several, and you can see that they are, this is just one hypothesis, but they are exploring how does the whole district behave when it's flooded or when it's not, depending. It's all the branches are houses. So if you were wondering what it was, but it's really a question, and all the around things are like agricultural fields that can be, of course, part of flooded. So all the thing is, how can I make the constraint of giving space to water to return this constraint into a new opportunity and into something that we don't know yet, but that maybe will create new cities that are like pleasant, regulative, productive, purificative. In fact, it's bringing back capacities into the cities, which right now, like we can say that cities are not really able or capable of a lot of things. So like to kind of start to finish. Yes, I'm right here. Not exactly finishing, but now that I've explained, in fact, the issue at stake, it's finally a question of, I hope you understand that it's finally a question of overtaking risk management to explore what one can call opportunity-based design. It's not crisis management anymore. It's more daily life basis management and design. It seems obvious indeed that ways are open now towards new water-based cities, and that keeping an approach that is just crisis management would be somehow a huge missed opportunity. But now that I've explained like a very, very short way, issue, new perspective and thing, the question is, how can you participate? Now you know that what you have to do. How can you do it? Because it's not that easy. How can you concretely operate to create these new water-based cities, whatever, based on flood-related opportunities? Sometimes I think people are like scared when I put flood and opportunity in the same sentence, but it is the case. And this question is a real one. Like just to talk a little about me, I spent 7 years to understand how does it work and to restitute a PhD. Because this is about complexity. Complexity from ecosystems. You need to understand how do they participate into the water cycle. How does even a water cycle goes on? What are the different flood mechanisms? Because when I'm talking about floods, but yes, you have groundwater, riverine, pluvial, urban, whatever. And so it's very complex, but trying to understand this complexity and trying to take advantage of it is something that is a big thing, but with a great potential. So I've tried my thesis was on what we can call opportunity-based design for flood eco-resilient cities. Flood eco-resilient cities is an academic way to say new water-based cities in a way. And maybe you're going to be shocked, but one of the results of my thesis was this kind of maps. This is agreed for the observation, blah, 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 you can read. Finally, it is just a tool that is designed to help designers. At first it was for designers, and at the end we can see that it's also a tool for discussion, because it's words. So it's links between words and concepts and this kind of thing. How does it work? Quickly, you have the little purple bullets that are physical elements of the urban territory. And what I've tried to demonstrate is that there is a method that exists and that has this consistency and advantages that comes as a web of actions in between these urban elements of the territory, and this web of action as a production is producing opportunities, and opportunities as blue ones. This is just a summary. The map is way much bigger, but just to understand that finally, opportunity-based design for flood eco-resilient cities is a method, and I don't know if it's working, but theoretically it's working, and it has advantages. One of the advantages is like synergies between flows and physical elements to create social, environmental, or economic opportunities. And it's a method, to just simplify and try to be very short, it's a method that can be discussed into 4 sequences. The first, which is in the center, is like designing with water and nature. It means just before whatever you do, just take into consideration that you're gonna have not a dry land, but a land that has water variation on it, that has ecosystems. Think about whatever you do, like water and natural systems comes first, any design action. Second is like protect and restore the natural landscapes. Why it is in second position? It's because when you have landscapes that are capable of doing things, well, you have a lot of things to do by yourself. You have much more less things to do by yourself. Use the properties of the landscapes. They're working for you. In nature, in non-urban areas, you will find flooding, but with so much less impacts. Think about vegetation, think about soil composition, soil structure. Everything will help you. And once your landscape is kind of reworking, because even restoration, you will only be able to do it with 80% of its functions. You can't restore totally landscapes. You will be able to add, not recreate kind of, but just add what I call phase 3, which is maintain or create adaptive water landscapes. And I will illustrate them all, but the fourth one in yellow is like to establish cycles of resource reproductions, because you will see that all this system finally puts things together. So now you have all the ingredients, you just have to put them in and make them with synergical actions, just use the synergies in between the physical elements. So just to very go fast, because time is over, some example of the actions mentioned into the grid are like design with microenvironment. I should have put the Google map just to show. The Google map was like just green, but actually this site, which is in Groningen in the Netherlands, is not green. Might be green when it's dry, but it's not at all. It's with all kind of material and immaterial influences. Think about protecting land, wetlands. Well, I have seen all kind of things that I've already shown you: floating housing, amphibious housing. Think about urban culture, water treatment plants, ponds, and of course circulation of on-site produce resource. To very conclude in a short sentence, finally, what is it? You have to accept water on land because you don't really have the choice. You have to be resilient rather than resistant because water will always win the struggle or the fight. And you have to be proactive rather than reactive and explore new forms and functions with integration and multifunction because it's bringing a lot of potential and opportunities. And to just in a word, finally, you should look for the transformation of urban landscape by the exploitation of water-related opportunities. It's not to say that risk management is bad. This is not at all what is the purpose of this presentation. It's just to say that new ways are opened and we just have to explore them and maybe we'll see that it's very much more efficient. But maybe it's just a complementary action with risk management. Thank you for your attention.
Émilie Gascon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. Also to you, just a brief question, Émilie. Thank you for your inspirational examples, but what struck me, even though you have some more historic perspectives from non-European context, I was, by your presentation, struck if this kind of maps and schemes could be implemented, let's say, beyond the Eurocentric. Is it just a way of thinking that you're proposing, or do we need either a certain kind of political reality or an economic reality to even implement this way of thinking?
Maybe it's all of that, because when you look at this kind of proposition, first you have resistance. You have resistance into, like, people don't want to hear about it. Sometimes they will think it's too naive. But if you look at, for example, opportunity management in businesses, it's not something that is naive at all. They are doing risk and opportunities management. So, but just when you speak about these kind of actions, you will find resistance from populations, from researchers, from politics, from kind of everybody, because this is new. Even if we have examples, everything is new, and we have to prove and demonstrate that it's a real thing, and it's gonna work, and it's not naive at all. Yeah. But I think right now the first stage is to make demonstrators, and to in order to convince, because it's both bringing social impact, because it's a new way of thinking, of living in the city. It's a new way of your garden might be just water. It's a political action, because it's saying, okay, maybe your house won't. We will have to destroy your house because it's in a flooding area. It's all kind of influences of. So it's in your question was like all these kind of influences and people that yes, you have to convince one by one, and maybe it's going to work.
Yeah, well, my question is also about if we're getting at this through a Eurocentric gaze, basically. I know you had a Eurocentric perspective. You had a Chinese example there, but I was getting at the point where we are, let's say, the topic of climate change is obviously a planetary challenge. And most of the examples, or quite a lot of the examples that I've seen today, are very much from a Eurocentric perspective, whereas the building challenges of, let's say, people moving towards cities are in, let's say, countries such as China or Dubai or...
No, but China is a very good example, because I don't know if you know about this, but they have a national action that now is called sponge cities. They want to do this kind of things, not at a local or district level, but at a national level. So this is an example that are, yes, because it was too long, so I kind of cut some projects. But for example, the city of Kunshan, Kunshan, if you want to Google it, is doing a lot of work on this idea of sponge city. But sponge city is another word for water-based city, and it's very national, strategic attitude. So it's maybe I showed some European examples more than others, but it's something that it's not only European attitude. It's like everybody is trying to see how not to just be constrained, but just to be proactive and do something at large scales, small scales, interoperability scales, kind of, but all over the world it's coming.
Thank you for your inspirational
And
presentation.
You know, and just one last thing, like
Sure.
10 years ago when we were talking about benefits or opportunities, everybody was kind of shocked. And I can see that in a lapse of 10 years, attitudes have totally changed. So I hope that in 10 years, it's going to be something like we are not going to even wonder if it's working or not, but we're going to see that it's working.
Totally integral in our
It's
attitude.
evolving very fast.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Émilie Gascon. Without further ado, I would like to invite our panel discussion members to sit on the 4 chairs that is there. They will share one microphone. Jean Jalbert, I'll introduce them briefly in a minute. Bas Smets, Bruno Schnebelin, and Dominique Noël. Please join me here. Are you all here? Yes? Give them a little warm applause, please. Jean Jabel is Director of General at Tour-la-Vallée, a research institute for the conservation of the Mediterranean wetlands. He's a biologist and engineering degree in... it's only you, Dominique? Is Dominique coming? Okay, sorry. Engineering degree in agronoconomy. Bas Smets is a prize-winning landscape architect. He just told me that he's working in 35 projects in 13 different countries. So when I say prize-winning, I do mean serious business. And he is here as he is responsible for all the projects concerning with the landscape at the LUMA Foundation. The two of you, Bruno and Dominique, founded, and actually you were already mentioned several times, have founded Ulotopie, an international renowned, you call it street theater, but it is actually on water. That is something that I'm really intrigued by. I'll get to you in a second, but maybe, Bas, there's only one microphone. I'll give it to you.
1, 2, 3, ça marche.
Ça marche? Super. Bas, could you elaborate a little bit, just briefly sketch the landscape and the role of water here in our physical presence? We'll zoom out.
No, of course, Arles is directly related to water.
Yeah.
For a very long time, the whole Camargue was, of course, a natural estuary of the Rhône, has been diked in, has been used to cultivate the lands, and so that in a way that the natural gradient from the saline to the fresh water has been much more controlled than it was before. But at the same time, so the Camargue is kind of major natural landscape right next to Arles. But at the same time, while studying the area, we also found some things that are not that visible. For example, this canal running next to the site, Canal de Craponne, built in the 16th century. So in a very visionary way, they built this canal to irrigate the barren lands of the Crau, and which is a bypass between the Durance and the Rhône. So what I think is very interesting here is that water has always been seen as this resource and this risk, but there's been many intelligent ways of coping with that. And even today, as I explained this morning, this water of the Craponne will be used to transform this desert-like conditions outside on the Parc des Ateliers into a lush park. So I think, and in that way, this knowledge in the region is so important that there is very interesting ways of dealing with water.
Yeah. This knowledge in the region, could you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, how does that inform your design?
But for example, we can speak of the tour du voilà, having this knowledge about the water systems. But it's also speaking to the association of the Craponne. There's a kind of way of dealing with water that is maybe much more elaborate than, for example, in Belgium, where water is much more kind of a risk for flooding, but not as much seen as a resource.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you already mentioned, I saw you there for the whole event, so I was wondering if you could respond through your, let's say, challenges or respond to the four stories we have heard. Is there something that resonates with you and the project that you are involved in?
Yes, if I may shift to French.
Mais bien sûr, allez-y.
Merci. Oui, bien sûr, il y a beaucoup d'éléments qui ont résonné. Le premier, c'est peut-être cette notion de l'eau qui est devenue invisible et du bénéfice des inondations et de l'eau qui a complètement disparu. Et c'est vrai qu'en Camargue, même si cette culture de l'eau est très présente, et si à Arles, la culture de l'eau est encore présente, le fait est que le Rhône, qui est le géniteur de cette Camargue, c'est lui qui a apporté tous ces sédiments, qui a créé cette Camargue, le Rhône n'est plus visible. On ne le voit que brièvement lorsqu'on traverse un pont, mais on peut faire 40 km le long du bras du grand ou du petit Rhône, on ne le voit pas, on n'en a jamais la notion de la présence. Et on a complètement oublié l'eau, y compris dans sa dimension de risque. Elle n'existe tout simplement plus. La Camargue, pour beaucoup de Camarguais, c'est un espace comme un autre, dans lequel ni le Rhône ni la mer n'ont leur place. Et ça, voilà, c'est l'histoire de ce qui s'est passé depuis la fin du XIXe siècle, depuis l'endiguement. Alors que c'est un territoire d'eau, si les gens l'ont investi, c'est précisément parce que c'est un delta. Il faut rappeler que les deltas, ça a été brièvement dit, mais ce sont des unes à produire de la vie. Hein. C'est un delta, cette interface entre l'eau douce, l'eau salée et la terre, ça produit 3 fois plus de matière vivante que les forêts équatoriales qu'on a dans notre imaginaire collectif comme l'élément le plus riche en biodiversité. Ben voilà, un delta, c'est 3 fois plus productif qu'une forêt équatoriale. Donc la convoitise des hommes a été très vite et très, très forte sur ces territoires. Et en même temps, les hommes ont voulu s'affranchir des contraintes liées à ça. On l'a réussi ici en Camargue à la fin du XIXe siècle avec cet endiguement. Et depuis, on a perdu cette notion, cette présence de l'eau et cette culture du risque. Un autre élément, et notamment dans la présentation de Han Meyer, c'est cette histoire, cette histoire forte qu'il faut raconter de la Camargue. L'histoire du siècle et demi passé, c'est l'histoire de la maîtrise. Et l'histoire inventée aujourd'hui, c'est l'histoire, je pense, de l'adaptation et de la résilience. Comment faire en sorte qu'en se fondant sur cet écosystème, et ça a été dit aussi, le Rhône est le delta du Rhône, la Camargue est un des deltas les moins vulnérables au monde, celui qui est encore le mieux préservé, qui sont dans un équilibre, et ça c'est vraiment l'œuvre des Camarguais, parfois dans l'intention, mais ils ont réussi à faire aujourd'hui un delta qui est plein de potentialités, qui est une mosaïque équilibrée entre des espaces protégés, de l'agriculture, de l'urbanisation, quelque chose qui est équilibré et qui est encore très résilient. À nous de valoriser au mieux cette résilience, de faire en sorte que cette biodiversité, ces espaces naturels soient des éléments moteurs sur lesquels on peut fonder cette résilience, fonder une adaptation. Le dernier élément, et c'est, je pense, la présentation de Ghislaine Virest-Leblanc qui disait, c'est la nécessaire appropriation et compréhension par les habitants, par les acteurs du territoire. Et là, je pense qu'on n'y est pas encore. Cette histoire, il faut l'écrire, mais on ne peut pas l'écrire sans les habitants ou contre eux. Et donc, tout l'enjeu, c'est bien ça, à mon sens, c'est faire comprendre que oui, les choses bougent et les choses vont bouger. Des cartes ont été montrées qui peuvent faire peur, mais ça ne sera peut-être pas ça sera peut-être moins, ça sera peut-être plus. Mais néanmoins, oui, ça va bouger. On ne peut pas aujourd'hui concevoir la Camargue telle qu'elle est aujourd'hui. Hein. Le trait de côte est une utopie, ce n'est plus un trait, c'est un espace mouvant et qui va bouger. À nous de trouver les moyens pour que cette histoire à raconter autour de l'adaptation de la résidence soit une histoire désirable et pas une histoire qui fasse peur. Aujourd'hui, la perspective fait peur. À nous de faire en sorte que cette menace soit transformée en opportunité et qu'on arrive à construire ensemble une histoire désirable.
Yeah. So you're talking about the lack of visibility making the memory fade, and obviously there's a big challenge and potential in the delta that you have. Now, I know some biologists that, let's say, have, and actually it is also in your title, the conservative approach, and some that have a progressive approach. You seem to be in the latter camp. But I'm just wondering, what are the tools you have? And then I'm actually also thinking about theater, but I'll get to that in a moment, to actually tell that story. How do you do that in this region, to engage people?
D'abord, je ne sais pas exactement ce que vous entendez par approche conservatrice ou approche... mais je pense qu'on peut justement, et l'enjeu c'est aussi d'avoir des deltas multifonctionnels, des approches multifonctionnelles. On peut absolument avoir un delta qui soit très riche en biodiversité et en même temps qui puisse accueillir des populations, qui puisse avoir une agriculture qui fasse vivre des gens et puis qui puisse accueillir, qui puisse laisser un espace de liberté au Rhône et à la mer. C'est ça l'enjeu. Et voilà, à nous d'inventer une histoire qui fasse envie. Comment le faire ? Justement, je pense que des événements de cette nature sont un des leviers sur lesquels travailler. Puis on a des outils ici, on a un parc naturel régional qui est justement un petit parlement de la Camargue, un endroit où les acteurs du territoire se rencontrent, s'entendent ensemble, s'entendent sur les enjeux du territoire et comment y répondre pour les 15 ans à venir. C'est typiquement le type d'instance qu'il faut activer, qu'on active, mais à mon avis pas encore assez, pour que ces enjeux soient pleinement appropriés. C'est quand même intéressant de savoir que le parc naturel régional de la Camargue existe depuis 50 ans, oui, à peu près 70. Eh bien, il a fallu attendre 40 ans pour que sa charte, c'est-à-dire son document fondateur qui dit quels sont les enjeux et quels sont les objectifs sur lesquels on s'engage en travaillant en commun, attendre 40 ans pour que la charte mentionne la présence du Rhône et de la mer. Dire que oui, finalement, ça existe et peut-être ça serait bien de leur laisser un petit peu d'espace pour qu'ils puissent bouger. Voilà. 40 ans pour ça. Donc, mais ça avance, ça progresse. Mais à nous de faire en sorte que ce parc se saisisse pleinement de ces enjeux-là et puisse, avec les acteurs du territoire, et puis très largement diffuser ce message comme oui, il y a un avenir désirable, mais effectivement à la condition de renoncer à la fixité. Il va falloir bouger, relocaliser des actions, des activités, éventuellement même des villages entiers. Il faudra le faire. À nous de l'inventer de façon anticipée et pas réactive, comme ça a été dit, et avec cette approche qui fait envie.
Yeah. Because we touched on storytelling, I don't know if it's Dominique or Bruno, so I'll put it here. Who will answer the question? Je le mets ici, comme ça. Moi, je me demandais déjà, several times it was mentioned, this idea of storytelling. And while looking at your website, I thought there was two questions. One is, what got you started to make street theater on water? And then secondly, could you, let's say, elaborate a little bit on this storytelling aspect and how do you reach the audience with very provocative theater pieces? I don't know who to address, and you can respond also in English or French.
Alors, par rapport au storytelling, je pense qu'on ne peut pas mettre que de l'eau de Javel dans l'eau. Il faut aussi y mettre du rêve, y mettre de la mythologie et de la poésie. Et si on est passé du théâtre de rue à l'eau, c'est pas un hasard, c'est puisque la compagnie Ilotopie est née sur une petite île du Rhône, qui est une enclave dans la palissade, en fait, qui est une réserve, où nous habitons encore, pour certains, 4 personnes de la compagnie habitent encore sur cette petite île inondable, où le Rhône est chez lui, il passe dans la maison quand il en a envie, il est le bienvenu, même, on l'attend presque. Et on a travaillé évidemment dans beaucoup de pays, dans beaucoup de villes, dans la rue, mais la rue s'est refermée petit à petit. Les espaces publics, pour y faire de l'art, pour y faire des rencontres même, s'est refermé avec le commerce, avec les magasins franchisés, avec les rues piétonnes. Y mettre du désordre, rebattre les cartes dans l'espace public est devenu difficile. Si on prend l'eau est un espace public encore très libre. Il n'y a pas de voiture sur l'eau, il n'y a pas de publicité. On arrive encore à... Pas encore, ça va venir. Mais... Et voilà, donc notre projet, c'est d'être sur l'eau. On y est depuis une vingtaine d'années à faire du spectacle dans 55 pays de la planète. Et on a un projet sur Arles de refaire ce face-à-face entre un public, des citoyens et l'eau, avec un amphithéâtre d'eau entre Arles et Pont de Crau sur le canal.
So now I'm challenged to think that maybe the air is next, but getting back to one of the projects, I was wondering, is then the water the carrier? Is it the narrative? You mentioned poetry and you mentioned the metaphor. So which role does the water, in fact, play in the pieces? Could you unpack that a little bit, either you or Dominique?
on est parti de l'idée que l'eau est porteuse de toute la fantasmagorie des âges qui se sont écoulés jusqu'à aujourd'hui, et que du coup elle est porteuse de tous les rêves aussi, qu'elle a une mémoire et qu'elle est un espèce de grenier des fantasmagories collectives. Et du coup on essaye de se saisir de ce pouvoir qu'a l'eau pour contenir des choses qu'on n'arrive pas à nommer, ou pour contenir des choses qu'on imagine. Et on essaie de s'en saisir pour la mettre en œuvre dans des mises en scène et des scénarios qui tiennent compte de cette dimension, c'est-à-dire que l'eau ne constitue pas une limite, la surface de l'eau ne constitue pas une limite, dans le sens où, sur la dernière création qu'on est en train de travailler, sur la dernière création sur l'eau sur laquelle on travaille actuellement, on était en résidence au Bois François à Port-Saint-Louis jusqu'à aujourd'hui, on a démonté hier dans la tempête. Et du coup, cette limite entre l'eau et l'air, entre le visible et l'invisible, on aimerait la réduire à le vivant peut passer de la surface de l'eau à sous l'eau, en fait, à être immergé, tout en continuant à être une narration. Enfin, je ne sais pas si je suis très claire, c'est un peu compliqué. Ça veut dire que la narration peut se poursuivre à la fois sous l'eau, en immersion et en émergence, voilà. Et du coup, c'est vrai que ce que disait Bruno tout à l'heure est très juste. L'eau, c'est une scène vierge, et du coup, on s'en amuse, on en joue, voilà.
I was thinking while you were talking that we live in a very fear-based society, I dare say, and you're trying to, with your pieces, maybe introduce a new perspective on our relation with the water, and trying to look for this free space, or literally, I think it's in the subtitle of our conference, the common, the water, the air, the earth, in that sense, as being capitalized on. I know we're running a little bit late, so I suggest we just open it up to the public in this instant, if that's okay with the panel. Otherwise, I'll get back to you. But I look at my watch, yes. I think for the last 10 to 15 minutes, I would like to open up. Is there a question to either one of these panelists or somebody who gave a lecture? If not, you sure? Take your time. I was wondering, in fact, Monsieur Jean Jalbert, if you could elaborate a little bit on the role of design in your... is it a foundation? May I call it a foundation? It is, okay. Well, we're talking transdisciplinary, breaking the silos, so that's why I'm actually provoking this.
No, you're right. Donc notre fondation n'est pas dans le domaine du design, mais précisément, donc nous sommes une fondation scientifique, et notre objet est de comprendre comment ces milieux fonctionnent, comprendre quels sont les besoins des hommes qui en vivent, et faire des propositions à la fois en termes de gestion, mais aussi de politique publique. Donc nous sommes un peu loin du design, mais néanmoins nous sommes convaincus, et c'est un peu la discussion qu'on avait juste avant cette conférence, que c'est par la transdisciplinarité, c'est par la perméabilité, la porosité entre les disciplines et les champs que les choses bougeront. On est aujourd'hui trop chacun, justement, alors c'est peut-être l'approche conservatrice dont vous parliez tout à l'heure, dans nos croyances et nos certitudes, et les naturalistes, les écologistes, les scientifiques en sont pétris. Et c'est vrai qu'on a beaucoup de mal à sortir et à s'ouvrir à d'autres perspectives, et je trouve exemplaire et vraiment... je pense que c'est vraiment la voie, ce qui se tisse ici, c'est-à-dire comment est-ce qu'on peut faire dialoguer des gens, des artistes, des ingénieurs, des personnes, des architectes, des biologistes, sur un objet commun, dans une perspective justement désirable. Encore une fois, on est dans une configuration qui a tous les éléments pour faire peur, et qui fait peur de fait, et souvent la réaction, c'est au mieux du déni, on va dire, au pire du rejet, mais en tout cas une attitude qui n'est pas propice à la projection. Et là, à nous de faire tomber les murs. Un mur, c'est justement arriver à parler entre nous, à faire en sorte que les disciplines dialoguent, Et grâce à ça, je pense qu'on sera capable de rendre désirable un avenir qui, pour le moment, fait peur à beaucoup. Et ça, c'est vraiment l'enjeu. Et je pense que c'est un enjeu dans lequel nous sommes résolument engagés, en tout cas.
Yeah, yeah. Boss, also for you, this question of, let's say, the role of the designer, because you are obviously still educated, I dare say, in the, although landscape architects are always more modest than proper architects, you are probably also still educated in the larger question, larger gesture. So my question to you is, like, if you could give advice to a young landscape designer now, with the challenges we face, what kind of advice would that be, with your experience so far?
I think there would be a double advice. I think on the one hand, and we discuss this often in the office, that we understand our role more and more as a kind of chef d'orchestre, because we need to know so many things that we cannot know them all, from botany to hydrology to understanding topography I mean, there's so many. Making a landscape is so much. It's really so complex that we try to open ourselves to all disciplines. And maybe architecture has not done that for a while, but we try to really create a kind of shared intelligence around the project, which we need. And this one is a very good example of it, because Maya Hoffman is one of the rare patrons that really tries to create this multidisciplinarity from the beginning. And it's really amazing how while speaking to all different disciplines, you come up with very different views and very different solutions. So one point would be to really be open to all possibilities, not think that you're the one master that will make this one great design, but it's really kind of trying to create this shared intelligence. I really believe in this shared intelligence. And just now, I'm looking at my boots, because I was just in a nursery for water plants, and again learning things that will be interesting to the project. And the second thing is, and I relate to what Han Meijer said, storytelling, the narrative. I think all landscape projects are stories, and we made a book a couple of years ago called Landscape Stories, because it is about imagining, and once you have the story right, you can build it. And I do believe that at one hand you have to try to create this shared intelligence, this participatory intelligence, and at the same time have a very strong narrative to know where you're going, because the narrative, just like a book, in a way writes itself. You know, like.
But it's also informed by, let's say, cultural code, economic reality. So what are then the guiding principles for this shared narrative? For instance, here in the Camargue, to make it nice and local.
Yeah, that's too difficult a question, of course.
Okay.
No, because there's no rule in the end. In the end, it's also about intuition, and it's about what you think should happen. So, but I do believe that this, and I see other landscape architects doing it in a similar way. I think landscape architecture is a very good method, in a certain sense, to give shape to the territory, because we have this openness, or this necessary openness to other disciplines.
I look at the audience one more time. This is your last chance, ladies and gentlemen. Again, either to one of the speakers or the panelists. Harriet, great. What is your question, and who do you address it to? And I'll hold the mic.
Okay, I have a question to Han, actually, because we started the conversation, but we didn't really finish it. And it was about, well, first of all, I thought it shows so much your passion that you come a few days in advance to get a conversation with the territory, and not only with people here. But then you say that you came to Arles, so you immediately went to see the Rhône, and that was quite a shocking confrontation. So could you share your thoughts about that with us? And I was also wondering what your advice would be, perhaps.
Han, will you join me on the stage for a second? Otherwise, you're so in the shade. I wouldn't want that.
Thank you very much. Well, the shocking experience where you refer to was that when we went walking to the Rhone, then you come to an elevated dike, and directly behind it is a kind of backyard of the city, and the Rhone itself is, well, the embankments are covered completely with a kind of concrete, and you can imagine worse examples. For instance, in some Asian cities, you see the city even worse related to the river. But here, I would have expected in this time when, well, since the 1980s, 90s, a lot of cities are, after the big industrial period, a lot of cities are busy with transforming their riverfronts into an orientation of the city to the river and rethinking about how to deal with the riverfront. This, of course, this has a lot to do with flooding, but if you look also to French cities, Lyon, Bordeaux, they spend a lot of energy to create a new relationship with the river. And here, well, you can walk along the river. There is a platform at the low level just above the river, but there is nothing happening. And I'm of course aware that it has to do with the flood problem, and that it's not for nothing that this elevated embankment has been constructed. And I've not immediately an answer on your question, but what I suggested, during the lunch we talked about the same problem, and I was suggesting, did anyone ever already look to how the whole discharge system of the Rhone is working with the split into the Petit Rhone and the Grande Rhone? And is it, for instance, possible to change that split into a system that the Petit Rhone takes more water than the Grande Rhone? And you can, a part of the solution can be that. Another part of the solution is that I think there should be something possible comparable with the Room for the River project in the Netherlands, which means that you don't solve the problem at the end, but the cause of the problem is how the whole river catchment area is treated during the last century. And I was surprised, I have to say also a little bit, by the presentation of Ghislaine Verheijs-Leblanc. Thank you very much. Because her orientation, I think she left the conference. I saw her leaving. I can't address the question to herself now, but she was focusing very much on the effects of flooding, taking for granted that floodings take place, while the whole change in approach, which you can see in many different countries now, that is that you can do also something about the reasons, the causes of flooding, by not focusing only on the far end of the river in the delta, and there are the problems, but to think about what can we do in the whole river basin area. And here in the delta itself, I would say there should be a start of a discussion, perhaps it's already going on how the discharge of the Rhone is organized around Arles. And that can, well, perhaps decrease the pressure of the water on Arles, and then you have a new situation where you can think about what to do with the river embankments.
Thank you for that very clear answer, and let's say future challenges for the region. Do you know if this scale is being addressed? Woohoo! Do you know if it's being addressed, as Han?
It has been addressed, but I'm not a specialist in hydraulics, but I know that the Petit Rhone takes about 10% of the total flow of the Rhone River, 90% going to the large branch. And it's decreasing. There is siltation into the small branch of the Rhone River, so the rate of the discharge is decreasing over time. Some have thought about how to ensure that there is a bigger amount of flow going to the small branch, but I'm not sure that there is any good prospect in this. Yeah. So, but on the other hand, what you mentioned is this lack of multifunctionality of the management of the Rhone River banks. Unfortunately, I also share your views, and it's not a criticism against the people who are managing the dikes, but there is an absolute priority to flood protection. So dikes have only one purpose: flood protection. We can't even walk on the dikes, not in the city, but on the you can't cycle on the dikes. You can't go with a horse on the dike. While it's the only elevated point where you can see the Rhone River, otherwise you can never see the Rhone River unless you cross it through a bridge or boat. But yeah, so the only way to discover the Rhone River is inaccessible to anybody because of this top priority flood protection objective. And here I think we have missed a big opportunity. Perhaps it's not missed forever, but we have to rethink how to accommodate this flood protection objective with other objectives, including tourism, recreation, enjoying well-being, and this at the moment has not been considered at all, and this is a big challenge for the next years.
Great, so 2 very interesting proposals already at the end of this conference. I think I want to look at you, Dominique and Bruno, for the last question. That's to do with people, because we've been addressing the water, the landscape, the politics, the economics, the role of the designer. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the attitude of the people. I saw that you were in the movie, the documentary that was screened. What makes a Camarguin, and you said we let's say, started our theater company living so close to this water. What is the attitude, or the core attitude of the people here?
J'ai envie de parler des murs. Je pense que on ne tiendra pas l'eau avec des murs, et que ni avec des digues, et qu'il y a aussi des murs horizontaux comme la mer Méditerranée qui sert à protéger l'Europe des migrations africaines. Donc on fait aussi des murs d'eau. Et je ne crois pas qu'on s'en sortira avec des systèmes technocratiques comme ça, de murs, qui peuvent s'élever aussi bien aux États-Unis que dans d'autres pays de la Méditerranée. Comment peut-on ne pas essayer de trop contenir l'eau? Voilà, c'est de ça que j'aimerais parler, de la difficulté du mur.
Et vous avez a suggestion how that could be done? Is theater the vehicle?
Je préfère les éponges, puisqu'il y avait l'idée de ville éponge ou de cité lacustre. Oui, je préfère la porosité, et je pense qu'il y a...
C'est aussi la porosité ici?
Bien sûr, bien entendu.
D'accord. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel we've really touched upon a lot. But please help me, before I say some words of closure, to help the panel, to thank the panel. They don't need any help, they're all fine on their own. I need help and a drink after 3 hours of standing here. Thanks again, give it up for Jean Labert, Bas Smets, Bruno Schnebelin and Dominique Noël. Let me look at my closing notes. I thank the ones that are still here after 3 hours of marathon. I think it's 1/3 of the population of this region that needs to be displaced, if I remember correctly in Ghislaine, her talk, and it's 1/3 of the crowd that is still remaining, so we're doing something right here, or not. I think we did touch upon a lot. Scale, time, maybe not so much about the economics, but risk definitely, and how to deal with risk. Is it an opportunity or is it a challenge? Or how, let's say, these evenings can play a role, or theater, or like the ateliers of LUMA, can play a little role in creating perspectives through silos, through disciplines, in order to come up again with proper responses on different scales. I will not aim to do a thorough roundup because so much has been addressed, but I do want to bring to your attention the exhibition once more. We'll have drinks at the Atelier for those of you who are not finished talking about this topic and want to speak to the keynote lecturers in a more personal manner. In about half an hour, on my left-hand side, there will be a performance with Béatrice Dahl and Virginie Despentes called Littéraire Pasolini. So that's in half an hour. Please join us with cocktails. And my last question would be to help me thank all the organizers, the translators, the people of the technician, but of course, Mr. Halmeijer, Senvis Bayrak, Ghislaine Verheijst Leblanc, and Émilie Gaston for their inspirational stories. Give it up.